Hello, this is the first of several narratives I plan to record, which are explaining why the Christian religion is true. When I say the Christian religion, I mean the basic, common, old-fashioned Christian religion, as in the Nicene Creed. I know there were lots of different denominations, but this is basically my understanding of biblical Christianity. And this is aimed not at people who want to make fun and say rude things, but people who might actually have an open mind, people who can see that this world is going to hell in every possible sense of that word, and who maybe think perhaps there is some hope somewhere. If I could see enough evidence and be persuaded, then perhaps I might become a Christian if I can see the evidence. So I'm going to, over a series of videos, try and explain some of the basics. I'm not going to try and do it very emotionally, but as factually and rationally as I can. The Christian faith is clearly based on the idea that Jesus of Nazareth was a supernatural being. He was born of a virgin, didn't have an earthly father. He performed miracles, he walked on water, he healed the sick, he raised the dead. He was crucified, dead and buried, and on the third day he rose from the dead, not as some wheezing corpse, but with a new supernatural glorified body which lives forever. And after that he ascended to heaven, and he's coming back in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end, as the Apostles' Creed says. The Apostle Paul has a lot to say about the resurrection of Jesus in his first letter to the Corinthians, and in particular he makes the point that if Christ wasn't raised from the dead with a new glorified body, then the Christian religion was a waste of time. And he said, however, he did rise from the dead, and he gave a number of accounts of witnesses. Christian idea is that Christian belief is that we have a number of witnessed accounts, not necessarily that every single writer of the gospel had personally seen him, but the witness accounts have been passed down, and certainly the men who went out from Jerusalem to spread the church, the start of the church, to spread the word of Christ, most certainly they were swearing on their lives they had seen the risen Christ. And it was on that belief and on that teaching that they founded the church. Much more could be said about the resurrection. I want to keep these videos down to 5 minutes or so. But obviously people who deny that Christ was raised from the dead can reasonably be expected to be asked, okay, so what do you think happened then? And there are these different accounts, different explanations or supposed hypothetical explanations about what happened. Did the disciples steal the body? Were they hallucinated? Was the whole story completely invented? Or did Jesus swoon on the cross and later come round? Just want to briefly take a look at some of these ideas. First of all, did the disciples steal the body? It seems unlikely that they would have been able to, even if they'd wanted to. But if they did steal the body, it's a big problem, because they would have known that Jesus was dead, and so they would have known that they were lying about the resurrection. Now, 11 out of the 12 apostles were killed for their faith. They were martyred. The only one who wasn't killed was John. He died in prison. So these guys, none of them got rich. None of them gained any power. The church was under persecution. These guys had a hard time, and they got themselves into trouble for saying that they'd seen the risen Christ. Now, if they stole the body, they would have known that they were lying. Now, sometimes people will die for a lie if they believe in it, but who would die for something they knew was a lie? This isn't a very realistic explanation. Mass hallucination. Did the disciples all believe that they'd seen Jesus? They'd seen a ghost, as it were, and they thought it was real? This doesn't seem very likely. It seems John Shelby Spong, the late heretical American bishop, believed something like this in his book Resurrection. But where is the precedent for this? Can you point to any movement in history which began following a mass hallucination? Yeah, Jim Jones managed to persuade a lot of his followers to drink Kool-Aid, which was laced with cyanide. That movement didn't get very far, and this wasn't a mass hallucination. It's not a very credible idea. I've heard people say, oh, it was all made up. Oh, really? Well, I suppose you could argue that, but have you got any evidence? if the story of Jesus was made up, then who made it up? When did they make it up? Why did they make it up? What documents have you got? The history is pretty clear that the church began in Jerusalem around about the time that we understand it began. So it wasn't made up centuries later. It must have been made up at the time. And as I've mentioned, who would have made it up? The disciples. If they'd made it up, then they would have known they were lying, and they would have been willing to die for a lie. This sounds to me just a default position for somebody who simply doesn't want to believe. The swoon theory is perhaps the daftest of the lot. When the Romans were very good at killing people, it's not difficult to know when somebody is dead. We read in the accounts that crucifixion was a very, very bad way to die. It takes about 2 or 3 days. I'm not going to go into details, but the 2 thieves on the cross crucified with Jesus, they broke their legs so that they would no longer be able to push themselves up, hold themselves up. They would suffocate very quickly. But when the guy came around to break Jesus' legs, it didn't break him because he was already dead. He shoved a spear in his heart. Jesus was dead, for sure. But, okay, if we imagine, so wave a magic wand and imagine that he wasn't dead and somehow he got back to the disciples, he would have been in such an appallingly beaten up state that there would have been no question of them thinking that he had gloriously come back in a resurrection body. It's a silly theory. So we're left with the fact that the disciples were telling us the truth, that Jesus did arise from the dead. There's so many other things about Jesus which make him special. Alice Roberts, who is an atheist, said a while ago, at Easter time, just a reminder, people don't come back from the dead. Well, yes, we know that, Alice. Ordinarily, if somebody did come back from the dead, though, if somebody did come back from the dead with a new glorious body, it would have to be a miracle on an absolutely massive scale. So basically, Alice Roberts is simply saying, I do not believe that miracles can happen. She's obviously willing to suspend her disbelief when it comes to life coming from nothing by accident, but that's a story for another day. But this guy, William of Ockham, one of many major contributors to the world of science, who was also a committed Christian, he came out with this thing called Occam's razor, which simply translated is you should look for the simplest solution. The most obvious solution, the most straightforward one, is quite likely the one that's true. And the idea that these simple men, fishermen, tax collectors, people of not particularly great education, they created the church. They took this narrative of Jesus' resurrection out there into the world. They changed the world, I would say, absolutely for the good. And the church is worldwide today. They believed that they had seen Jesus risen from the dead. In future videos I hope to make, I will discuss a number of other reasons pointing to why it is not incredible that Jesus, that this unique human being, that did actually rise from the dead and therefore is God. I'll come back with some more about prophecies in the near future. Meanwhile, take nothing on my word. I'm no one special, but the truth is special, and you owe it to yourself to inform yourself rather than just go with what rubbish stand-up comedians tell you to believe. Bye.